This boutique does not operate as a standard retail clothing outlet for the general public.
I understand the price. I have the exact amount of cash. I simply wish to buy the jacket for my boy.
Take your paper envelope and walk out immediately, before I have you arrested for criminal trespassing.
Yes, Mama. I'll be right there.
At exactly 3:45 on a freezing Tuesday afternoon, inside the ultra-exclusive Ferrari boutique on Fifth Avenue, the heavy silence was shattered by a sentence that cut deeper than the sub-zero New York wind. Julian, the senior store manager dressed in a sharp charcoal custom suit, leaned over the glass display case and locked his slate-gray eyes onto the 60-year-old black woman standing before him. He did not look at the envelope of cash she held tightly in her worn, calloused fingers. He looked only at her faded gray puffer jacket, with frayed cuffs, her scuffed walking shoes, and the dark skin of her lined face. The woman, Gloria James, had just politely asked to purchase a limited edition red leather racing jacket as a surprise milestone gift for her son. Julian adjusted his manicured cuffs, pulled his lips into a cold, bloodless smile, and lowered his voice to a venomous whisper that was clear enough for everyone in the room to hear. He told her that they sold luxury and heritage here, not merchandise for people who carried the odor of the inner-city housing projects. He told her that nothing in the store suited her background, and demanded she walk out immediately before he had security arrest her for disrupting their elite client protocol. Gloria stood entirely frozen, the words hitting her chest like heavy stones. Her fingers gripped the bow-tied envelope containing $2,200 of hard-earned savings so tightly that her knuckles turned a sharp, pale ash. Outside the reinforced glass window, suspended on a motorized scaffolding platform, a black window washer named Marcus stopped his squeegee mid-stroke, his mouth open in utter shock as he witnessed the blatant humiliation from the street. Gloria did not scream. She did not shed a single tear in front of a man who did not deserve her vulnerability. She slowly turned her back on the gold rose lights and the gleaming Formula One chassis, stepping out into the brutal, blinding Manhattan snowstorm with her head held high. Though her shoulders trembled from the sheer weight of the insult, she pulled out a cracked smartphone, her fingers shivering from the biting cold, and dialed a number she knew by heart. 2,000 miles away in a sunny private training facility in Miami, Florida, the phone rang. LeBron James, a 6'9" basketball titan worth hundreds of millions of dollars, was sitting on a custom-reinforced bench, ice pack strapped to his knees after an exhausting workout. He looked down, saw the word Mama flashing on the screen, and instantly answered with his usual warm smile. But the moment he placed the phone to his ear, the smile vanished. He didn't hear her voice, at first, only the sound of heavy, ragged breathing, trying desperately to swallow a sob, followed by a faint, forced laugh that he had known since his childhood in the bleakest winters of Akron, Ohio. When Gloria finally spoke, trying to minimize the incident on Fifth Avenue, LeBron stood up so fast the heavy ice packs crashed to the hardwood floor. His massive jaw tightened into a rock-solid line, and his free hand gripped the smartphone with such immense force that the plastic casing creaked under the pressure of his 300-pound frame. The air in the training facility seemed to turn completely to ice as his teammates and coaches suddenly went dead silent, watching the terrifying transformation of the usually joyful superstar. LeBron did not shout, he did not curse, but his deep voice resonated through the high ceilings like distant, threatening thunder as he told his mother to stay exactly where she was, promising her that he was boarding his private jet immediately. He hung up, his eyes burning with an ancient, fierce protectorate rage that had been forged in the days when they had absolutely nothing but each other. What the arrogant store manager in New York did not know, what the entire luxury boutique was about to find out, was that the woman they had just thrown out like garbage was the mother of King James, and the silent storm he had just unleashed would soon shake the very foundations of their corporate empire. But before the ultimate confrontation takes place on Fifth Avenue, you must understand the secret past that made this particular phone call matter of life and death. Because what happened next would not just shatter one man's career, it would inspire millions of people who have ever been told they don't belong. To truly comprehend the ancient, protective fire that ignited inside the basketball superstar on that warm Miami afternoon, one must leave behind the palm trees of Florida and the towering glass monoliths of Manhattan. You must travel backward through time, pulling away the layers of $100 million contracts, private jets, and global fame until you reach the fading industrial landscape of Akron, Ohio. In the late 1980s, Akron was a city that felt like it had been abandoned by the future, a place where the winter sky was permanently dyed the color of wet asphalt, and the monolithic rubber factories cast long, freezing shadows over cracked, potholed pavements. The air there always carried a distinct bitter scent of sulfur, coal smoke, and old machinery. It was into this harsh, unforgiving environment that Gloria James, a young black girl who was barely 16 years old, brought her infant son, LeBron Raymond James, home from the hospital. She was a child herself, stepping into a world that offered her absolutely no safety nets, no structural support, and no mercy. The early years of their life together were defined not by a home, but by an endless, exhausting cycle of transition, moving from one drafty, rent-controlled apartment to another, because the rent was always 3 weeks late. Their entire worldly belongings were permanently packed into cheap, heavy-duty blue plastic garbage bags that sat right next to the front door, a silent and terrifying reminder that they had to be ready to leave the moment the next eviction notice was slipped under the wood. There was a particular winter in 1989 that carved itself deeply into the young boy's memory. A winter when the temperature dropped so low the moisture on the inside of their bedroom walls turned into thin sheets of white ice. The ancient cast-iron radiator in their tiny apartment on Hickory Street had groaned, hissed, and finally died, leaving them at the mercy of a brutal Ohio blizzard that was dumping 2 feet of snow outside. The landlord had long since disconnected his phone to avoid the complaints of the poor, leaving the teenage mother and her 4-year-old boy completely alone, with nothing but a single rusty space heater that hummed weakly in the corner, its orange coils glowing like a dying ember. Gloria did not cry, and she did not break. She spent 3 agonizing hours that evening tearing apart old cardboard shipping boxes she had scavenged from the dumpster behind a nearby grocery store, using her bare hands and a dull kitchen knife to cut them into long, thick strips. She meticulously wedged those pieces of cardboard into the rotting, warped wooden frames of the windows, using layers of old masking tape to block the freezing drafts that threatened to turn their small living space into a tomb. When the night reached its darkest, coldest hour, and the space heater finally flickered out, the room grew so cold that their breath formed thick, white clouds of mist in the air. Gloria laid her son down on the worn, spring-bare mattress, took off her own heavy wool winter coat to place it gently over his small body, and then wrapped herself in a single, threadbare blanket right beside him. She spent the next 6 hours sitting awake in the dark, rubbing his small, freezing feet with her calloused hands, blowing her own warm breath onto his toes, just to keep him from crying himself to sleep. Every single morning, regardless of how bitterly cold the room felt or how completely empty the kitchen cupboards looked, Gloria would force herself out of that bed before the sun even rose. She would stand before the cracked, water-stained mirror in the cramped bathroom, straighten her spine, and stare directly into her own tired eyes. She would wash her face with freezing water from the tap, button up her worn coat, and walk out into the dangerous, ice-covered streets of Akron, with her head held extraordinarily high. She worked whatever grueling jobs the city could offer, a young mother without a degree, cleaning the massive office buildings of wealthy executives at midnight, scrubbing layers of grease off restaurant kitchen floors, and walking miles through neighborhoods where the sound of police sirens was the only constant melody. She did this while carrying the immense weight of loneliness, knowing that the world looked at a young, poor black mother with a gaze full of judgment and low expectations. Yet, whenever the small boy would look down at his scuffed, second-hand sneakers, or ask with big, confused eyes why they couldn't just stay in one place like the other kids, Gloria would slowly kneel down on the cold linoleum floor until her eyes were exactly level with his. She would place her strong hands firmly on his shoulders, look deep into his soul, and tell him that they were much bigger than the concrete walls that confined them. She told him that the cracked pavement they walked on did not dictate the height of the sky they were destined to reach, and she made him promise her one sacred thing, that he would never, ever let anyone on this earth make him feel small. Those exact words became an invisible, unbreakable suit of armor that the young boy wore as he grew taller, broader, and stronger than every other child in the state of Ohio. He watched with quiet reverence as his mother masterfully stretched a single, inexpensive bag of white rice and a small carton of eggs to last an entire 7-day week. Yet she would always set the table with a smile and call it a royal feast. He watched her count out nickels, dimes, and pennies onto the laminate kitchen counter for months, skipping her own meals just to save up enough money to buy him a second-hand, worn leather basketball from a local charity shop, ensuring her son had a tool for his dreams rather than a reminder of his poverty. As the years rushed forward like a torrential river, the young boy transformed from a local high school prodigy into a global cultural icon, and the physical distance between the public housing projects of Akron and the unimaginable luxury of the NBA grew incredibly vast. Yet, despite the $100 million mansions, the corporate empires, and the endless sea of cameras, the sacred bond between the mother and the son remained completely untouched by the corrupting influence of wealth. LeBron James achieved everything a human being could possibly dream of on the hardwood, earning 4 championship rings, 3 Olympic gold medals, and a financial fortune that placed him among the most powerful figures in global sports history. But every single accolade was merely a quiet tribute to the teenage girl who had kept him warm in the freezing dark. Whenever he stepped onto the court under the blinding glare of stadium lights, whenever he signed a historic lifetime endorsement deal, he was doing it for the woman who had walked through the sub-zero snow so that he could run. He bought her a massive, sprawling estate, ensured her bank accounts would never see the shadow of an eviction notice again, and gave her every single luxury she had been brutally denied in her youth. Yet, despite the immense wealth surrounding her, Gloria remained the exact same grounded, humble woman who fundamentally preferred comfortable walking shoes to designer heels, and simple, quiet acts of community service to the grand, empty displays of elite vanity. That was precisely why she had walked into the Ferrari store on Fifth Avenue that fateful afternoon, carrying nothing but a simple paper envelope of cash, wanting absolutely nothing more than to purchase a beautiful, meaningful gift for her son's upcoming career milestone. She had survived the coldest nights of Ohio, the hardest trials of poverty, and the systemic neglect of an entire society, only to be told by a man in a charcoal suit that her skin color and her simple clothes made her an unwanted intruder in a world of luxury. The massive distance between her painful past and her wealthy present had vanished in that single, agonizing moment of institutional humiliation, setting off a quiet, unstoppable chain reaction that was about to bring the full, unyielding weight of King James's global kingdom down upon the gatekeepers of Manhattan. The silence inside the Ferrari boutique on Fifth Avenue did not merely exist, it actively suppressed the outside world, creating an artificial atmosphere where every ticking second felt like a heavy weight pressing down on the chest of anyone who did not possess a multi-million-dollar portfolio. Gloria James stood perfectly still in front of the polished glass counter, her fingers still holding the brown paper envelope containing the $2,200 she had saved with absolute care. The warmth of the room, which had initially felt like a relief from the freezing New York blizzard outside, now felt heavy and suffocating. Julian, the senior manager, remained leaning slightly forward, his pale hands flat against the glass showcase that housed driving gloves made of hand-stitched lambskin. He did not look at her face. His eyes remained fixed on the frayed edge of her gray puffer jacket sleeve, where a small piece of synthetic insulation poked through a tiny tear. To Julian, that tiny piece of loose thread was a direct threat to the meticulously engineered illusion of supreme wealth that he was paid to protect. In his mind, luxury was not just about selling expensive mechanical objects. It was about weaponizing exclusivity to make the ordinary working class feel completely invisible. Gloria cleared her throat once more, her voice carrying the quiet, polite dignity of a mother who had spent her entire life trying to give her children something to be proud of. She calmly repeated her request, asking if she could see the limited edition red leather racing jacket with the signature prancing horse stitched onto the left breast, explaining that her son was about to achieve some historic, and she wanted to surprise him with the ultimate token of appreciation. Julian let out a short, nearly imperceptible breath through his nose, a soft, cynical sound that served as his opening salvo. He slowly stood up to his full height, adjusting the lapels of his charcoal suit with an arrogant, practiced flick of his wrists. He looked past Gloria, scanning the empty showroom as if she were a ghost standing in his way, before finally dropping his cold slate-gray gaze down onto her. He told her in a flat, clinical tone that the piece she was referring to was part of a highly curated private allocation reserved exclusively for their top-tier clients who maintained active vehicle profiles with the brand. He added, with a thin stretching of his lips that served as a mock smile, that the boutique did not operate as a standard retail clothing outlet for the general public. Gloria felt the words land like cold steel against her ribs, but she did not flinch, and she did not lower her head. She slowly placed the brown envelope onto the glass counter between them, her knuckles turning a pale ash color under the tension. She told him quietly, but firmly, that she understood the price, that she had the exact amount of cash required to complete the transaction immediately, and that she simply wished to buy the jacket for her boy. The sight of the plain, creased paper envelope resting on his pristine glass counter seemed to crack Julian's practiced, corporate composure. The thin smile vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, hardened expression of utter disgust. He did not touch the envelope. Instead, he stepped back as if the paper were contaminated, shifting his weight to signal the two burly, suited security guards standing near the entrance to close the distance. Julian lowered his voice to a venomous, hushed whisper that vibrated with deep institutional prejudice, telling her that they sold luxury, heritage, and an elite lifestyle here, not merchandise for people who carried the distinct odor of the inner-city housing projects into their sanctuary. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisoned, stripped of all corporate euphemisms to reveal the raw, ugly reality of the discrimination beneath. Julian leaned in slightly closer, his eyes narrowing as he delivered the final, devastating blow, telling her that absolutely nothing in this building suited her racial background or her obvious social standing. He commanded her to take her paper envelope and walk out of the glass doors immediately, warning her that if she remained in the space for one more minute, he would have her arrested for criminal trespassing and disrupting their elite client protection protocol. 2 floors above the sidewalk, suspended on the freezing motorized scaffolding outside, Marcus, the black window washer, stopped his squeegee completely, his face pressed against the cold glass as he watched the terrifying exchange unfold through the window. He could not hear the words through the thick, reinforced glass, but he recognized the aggressive tilt of Julian's chin, the threatening advance of the security guards, and the sudden, heartbreaking stillness that overcame the older woman standing at the counter. Marcus's hand shook inside his wet gloves, a profound sense of helpless rage burning in his chest as he witnessed another mother from his community being systematically stripped of her dignity by a man who measured human worth solely by the label on a suit. Gloria stood completely frozen for 11 seconds, the sheer malice of the insult echoing through her mind like a physical blow. The showroom around her, with its gleaming red sports cars and gold-lit display cases, suddenly felt incredibly small, hollow, and pathetic. Her eyes grew wet with the natural threat of tears. But she immediately tightened her jaw, drawing upon the ancient, unbreakable strength she had forged in the darkest winters of Akron, Ohio. She had promised herself decades ago that she would never shed a single tear in front of people who worshipped money and weaponized their own insecurity against the vulnerable. She slowly reached out, picked up the creased envelope of cash, and placed it back into the pocket of her faded jacket. Without saying a word, without shouting, and without giving Julian the satisfaction of seeing her break, Gloria James turned her back on the luxury boutique. She walked past the silent, imposing security guards and stepped out of the heavy glass doors, leaving the rose-gold warmth behind. As she vanished into the blinding, freezing Manhattan snowstorm, her head held extraordinarily high, even as the bitter winter wind threatened to erase her footprints from the pavement. The blinding Manhattan snowstorm continued to hammer the glass facade of the Fifth Avenue boutique on Tuesday morning. But the real storm was brewing inside the warmth of the showroom. Julian stood near the entrance, supervising a junior associate who was meticulously polishing the silver emblems on a display case. The memory of the poor black woman he had thrown out the previous week had entirely faded from his mind, dismissed as just another routine clearing of social debris from his pristine sales floor. Suddenly, the heavy glass entrance doors did not just open. They were pushed aside, with a deliberate, commanding force that caused the air pressure in the room to shift instantly. The low-fidelity ambient jazz playing from the hidden ceiling speakers seemed to vanish beneath the weight of an absolute, suffocating silence. Walking through the threshold was a human being of such immense, staggering proportions that the entire room seemed to shrink in his presence. Standing at 6 feet and 9 inches tall, weighing a rock-solid 250 pounds, LeBron James stepped into the rose-gold light of the boutique. He did not wear athletic clothes or casual attire. He was dressed in a pristine, hand-tailored midnight navy wool suit that draped perfectly over his massive shoulders, his leather dress shoes polished to a mirror-like shine. His face was an unreadable, terrifying mask of absolute calm, his jaw set like concrete. Beside him, walking with her arm resting gently in the crook of his massive elbow, was Gloria James, looking radiant in a long, elegant cream-colored cashmere coat, her head held high, her eyes calm and steady. Julian felt the blood completely drain from his face, his skin turning a sickly, translucent white as his eyes traveled up and up and up, until he recognized the unmistakable, globally famous features of the superstar. The two security guards who had previously stepped forward to intimidate an elderly woman now stood perfectly frozen, their hands locked at their sides, their bodies trembling slightly, as they realized they were standing in the shadow of a cultural titan who wielded more financial and societal power than their entire corporate board combined. LeBron did not shout, he did not raise his hand, and he did not break a single item in the store. He slowly walked toward the center of the marble floor, his massive boots making no sound against the stone, guiding his mother to a plush leather armchair near the center display. He gently helped her remove her coat, revealing a beautiful, simple silk dress underneath. LeBron then turned his body toward the counter, looking down at Julian from a height that made the manager feel completely microscopic. The silence stretched for 26 agonizing seconds, a tactical, heavy vacuum of time that allowed the sheer terror of the situation to settle deeply into Julian's bones. LeBron slowly reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a heavy, 4-inch thick, black leather portfolio, placing it onto the pristine glass counter with a dull, echoing thud. He did not say a word at first. Instead, he nodded toward the heavy glass entrance doors as three men in sharp gray business suits walked into the boutique, carrying briefcases. These were not bodyguards. These were top-tier corporate litigators from the most powerful legal firm in New York City. Accompanied by the regional director of Ferrari's North American operations, who looked entirely panicked. LeBron finally spoke, his deep, resonant voice vibrating through the glass showcases like distant, threatening thunder, instructing the regional director that they were here to conduct a formal audit of client discrimination and corporate protocol violations. The lead attorney opened the thick portfolio, spreading out several signed affidavits onto the glass counter directly in front of Julian's trembling hands. These documents were not about LeBron James. They were the voices of the invisible people Julian had crushed over the years. The first affidavit belonged to Marcus, the black window washer who had witnessed the entire humiliation from the freezing scaffolding the week before. Marcus had stepped forward without fear, documenting 3 other specific incidents over the past 2 years, where Julian had used identical, racially coded language to deny entry to minority customers under the guise of security protocols. The second document was a sworn testimony from a former junior accountant of the boutique, a young woman who had been fired 6 months prior for objecting to Julian's explicit written instructions to screen out clients based on zip codes associated with lower-income urban neighborhoods. The third testimony came from an elderly Hispanic maintenance worker who had been forced to use the service elevator because Julian claimed his uniform degraded the aesthetic value of the main showroom. As the crushing weight of the evidence accumulated on the counter, Julian's hands began to shake violently behind the glass, his breath catching in his throat as he realized his entire career, his carefully constructed reputation of elite status, and his livelihood were dissolving into nothingness in front of his superiors. LeBron James leaned forward slightly, resting his massive forearms on the edge of the counter, his dark eyes locking onto Julian's terrified, sweating face with the precision of a predator. He told the manager in a calm, lethal whisper that he had spent his entire life watching arrogant men try to make his mother feel small, and that every single championship ring on his fingers, every dollar in his bank account, and every ounce of influence he possessed was forged specifically to ensure she would never have to endure it again. He told Julian that his mother had survived the freezing, heatless winters of Akron by tearing apart cardboard boxes to protect her son, while Julian had spent his life hiding behind a cheap corporate title to look down on the people who built this country. LeBron looked at the regional director and quietly demanded that the store remain open for the next 30 minutes, because his mother had come to buy a birthday gift, and she would not leave without it. The regional director nodded frantically, his face pale, as he immediately informed Julian that his employment was terminated effective immediately, pending a full federal investigation into civil rights violations, and ordered him to step away from the register. Julian stood entirely ruined, his mouth opening and closing without sound, forced to stand in the corner of his own sanctuary as the woman he had called garbage, prepared to take everything. For the final 45 minutes inside the luxury boutique, the atmosphere transformed from a battleground of intense retribution into a quiet masterclass in reclaiming dignity. LeBron James stood calmly by his mother's side as Gloria slowly walked through the apparel section, her fingers gently brushing against the fine fabrics. She picked up the limited edition red leather racing jacket she had originally wanted, the one with the pristine stallion stitched onto the left breast. LeBron took it from her hands with a warm smile and placed it onto the counter. But he did not stop there. He added a second jacket, a pair of hand-stitched driving gloves, 2 pairs of classic sunglasses, a luxury leather weekend bag, and a silk scarf. He was not shopping out of greed or a desire to show off his immense wealth. Every time he picked up an item, he held it out to his mother first, asking softly if she liked it, and overriding her gentle protests with an affectionate nod. The total invoice came to just over $37,000. LeBron slid his black card across the counter, signed the receipt without a single second of hesitation, and then turned his head toward the corner where Julian stood completely ruined. LeBron did not whisper threats. He simply looked at the former manager and told him that today he had lost far more than a job. He had lost the rare privilege of learning what true strength looked like from the greatest woman he would ever meet. The immediate consequences of that freezing Tuesday morning rippled through the corporate structure of the luxury brand, like an earthquake. Julian was escorted out of the building by building security into the New York snow. His career in luxury retail permanently ended, his name blacklisted across every major fashion avenue in the country. The brand's global headquarters immediately issued a formal, public apology to Gloria James and implemented a mandatory civil rights and non-discrimination training program for every single employee across their international network. Furthermore, to avoid a massive, brand-destroying federal lawsuit from LeBron's legal team, the corporate board agreed to install a permanent bronze plaque near the front entrance of the Fifth Avenue showroom. The plaque carried a simple, powerful philosophy that read, "Every human being who steps through these doors is our most honored guest," ensuring that no ordinary working-class citizen would ever be frozen out of that space again. Marcus, the window washer, who had courageously provided the crucial first-hand affidavit, received a quiet, life-changing phone call from LeBron's representatives the following day, offering him full financial backing to establish his own independent commercial cleaning corporation in the city, lifting his family out of poverty forever. Yet, the true climax of this story did not belong to the corporate boardrooms of Manhattan or the luxury storefronts of Fifth Avenue. It belonged to the quiet community where the fire had first been tested. LeBron James took the insult his mother had suffered and used his Spring Hill media empire to launch a national initiative called the Gloria Foundation, dedicated to providing fully funded housing stability and educational resources for single mothers raising children in impoverished industrial towns. 2 weeks after the storm in New York, the viral video of the foundation's launch hit the internet like lightning, showing LeBron presenting a custom-designed line of deep red wool coats to 100 single mothers from the old neighborhoods of Akron, Ohio. Each coat featured a small gold crown embroidered on the interior lining with the initials GJ stitched beneath it. The digital footage captured the towering superstar, folding his massive frame down to kneel on the floor of a local community center, holding his mother's hands as she wept tears of pure joy, telling her in front of the entire world that she had never needed the validation of a luxury store, because she had already built a kingdom of her own. As the evening sun began to set over the city of Akron, painting the cold Ohio sky in deep shades of amber, gold, and bruised purple, the massive crowds and the camera crews finally drifted away. LeBron and Gloria walked together down the quiet, cracked sidewalk of their old neighborhood, eventually sitting down side by side on the worn wooden steps of a small porch that had seen far better days. The bitter wind still carried the faint scent of sulfur and old rubber from the distant, empty factories. But the cold no longer held any power over them. LeBron reached into a simple bag, pulled out the red leather racing jacket from Fifth Avenue, and gently draped it over his mother's shoulders to shield her from the evening chill. They sat in absolute, peaceful silence for a long time, watching the streetlights flicker to life across the pavement they had once walked, when they had absolutely nothing but each other. Gloria rested her head against her son's massive shoulder, her hand resting over the gold crown on his ring, knowing that the long journey from the dark, heatless apartments of their youth had finally brought them to a place of permanent warmth. The vow of a true king is never measured by the weight of the gold on his head or the vastness of the territory he commands, but by the absolute willingness to use his entire empire to protect the quiet dignity of the mother who taught him how to stand. Where are you listening to this incredible story from right now? Drop your city and your country in the comments section below, because I absolutely love seeing how far these cinematic journeys travel across the world. If this story moved you, even just a little, hit that like button below. It takes only a single second, but it helps spread this message to more people who need to hear it. And if you have not done so already, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss another masterpiece presentation. Share this video immediately with your mother, your family, or anyone out there who needs to be reminded that the harsh place you come from will never dictate the beautiful destination you are going. Walk like you have somewhere to go, and I will see you in the very next film.